when you do your spiritual work, and you start any sort of investigation into the mystical worlds, you'll come across time and time again this concept of the 5 elements, right? The 5 elements. You find it in China, you find it in India, you find it in European teachings. In all the teachings of the world seem to have this same idea that there are 5 elements. These are basically, they believe it developed through the study of nature, really, and man looked at the study of the nature and the processes of nature, the functions of nature, and a theory kind of came around to say that the substances of the world can be divided into 5 basic elements. You know, wood, fire, water, metal, and earth would be one way of looking at it. But we would define it as ether, right? Earth, water, fire, and air, right? Those are the kind of the elements. We find the same thing, the ones I've just described, actually, the wood and all that, is really Chinese. We find it in the I Ching a lot. We find it in the teachings of India, as I said. We find it in alchemy. This was actually a spiritual process, not a chemical one. It represented the transformation of the human soul, and the 5 elements come into that. We find it in, I think, Kabbalah. We find it in the tarot cards, talk about the 5 elements. We find it in astrology. All over the place we find this idea of the 5 elements. Now, I want to talk about them in terms of a very personal level of how we can use the 5 elements to transform ourselves. And in particular, I'm looking again today, talking kind of about yogic things a bit more too, because they come up in the idea of spiritual development. And so looking from the yogic point of view, the first one, let's take an ether for example. Now that represents like space, limitlessness. It's kind of the emptiness, the void of things. It's the all-prevailing now. It's the present moment. It's things being pregnant with potential. This is what ether is. It's probably the hardest one to understand. But if we want to control the ether element in our work, one of the simplest ways, and probably the simplest ways, which certainly comes out in the ideas in yoga, is to use the gaze, the dristi, as they call it. The gaze expresses the quality of the ether element. So, for example, there's techniques such as gazing at a candle, which can steady the gaze and steadies that ether element in ourselves, right? And so we work with all 5 elements all the time, because by doing that we naturally get them all in balance. So that's how you handle. So anything that deals with gazing, when one does a yoga posture, you will often focus on a point in the distance of some sort. Your dristi, your gaze, will be focused on something. But holding that gaze is very powerful. The gaze is an incredibly powerful thing. And it comes a lot in clairvoyance, particularly. We use the gaze when we look at someone. The gaze will help me to tune into someone and pick up things on a psychic level. It's as if the dristi, that ether element that I'm working with there, hones in telepathically to pick up on the spiritual levels of the person. So it's quite an important thing when it comes to psychic development, because I know a lot of you follow obviously my blog because of my work as a medium. We also have the earth element. Now the earth represents solidity, practicality, it's stability, it's being grounded. You know, all those things are important. That's all another part of our nature, is to have all these qualities in ourselves. And one of the best ways to develop the earth element of ourselves is through physical work, through exercise. I mean, whether you do yogic exercise or you do push-ups or whatever, you know, all forms of exercise will help build that earth energy in ourselves, that earthly quality, that element within ourselves. So it's expressed through form and structure, basically. And in yogic asanas, they are the perfect way to develop that earth energy balance. We've got the gazing working in conjunction with the physical postures in yogic practice. Now the quality of water is one of the other elements. Now water represents, of course, fluidity, its softness, its fearlessness too, because it plunges the depths, you know. It will take on any challenge. Water will go anywhere, you know, without fear. Those are human qualities that we can see in that. And the idea with developing that quality is to create the ability to go with the flow of things, you know. So for example, in yogic work, when you're doing yoga practice, we have a thing called vinyasa, which is like flow. You know, you move from one posture to another posture to another posture to another posture, with the breath all in accordance with it and the gaze in accordance with it, so that you're going with a flow of energy. You see, and that's the really great form of yoga, actually, those that practice yoga, because it takes you, it almost carries you. You know, this is the going with the flow idea. So, but this can also come into other things, you know, in life, to go with the flow. If you're doing you don't have to do yoga or to follow these things either. If you're doing, you know, physical energy of some sort, go with the flow of things. Pace yourself, for example, you know, and watch your body. Listen to the flow of your breath if you're a long distance runner, you know when to speed up, know when to slow down, know how to move with it. If you're a tennis player, know when to stop, know when to get your attention right, whatever, you know. That is the flow, and that's the vinyasa. That's a very important part again in yoga. So in yoga, you're using the physical exercise, the earth energy, the earth part of it. You're using the gaze to keep the steadiness, say you're in the tree pose and so forth. The water flow is the flow of the energy to it. Now, the other element that we also need to introduce into our life too, and into our physical work and other things, is fire. Without fire, we don't have the vitality. So fire is also, it cleanses. It's a cleansing form of energy. It's the transformative form of energy. Like I mentioned alchemy earlier, it transforms the lead into the gold. It heats things up. It illuminates things. It inspires us. It's like the sun. It's a form of inner alchemy, the idea of fire. So in the yogic work, just from a physical sense, to increase the fire element in ourselves, we can use things what are called bandhas. They're locks. So it's like a bandha might be, for example, such as the point where you would hold the breath, for example. That's a simple form of a bandha, really. You're holding something. It's a lock. But there's also other ones that are used in, particularly in things such as Kundalini yoga, where you will use a lock on the with each of the breaths on the spine, and you would use a lock in the throat, a lock in the stomach, a lock in the pelvic floor, and so forth. I'm not going to describe all those, but there's many of these so-called bandhas. You know, even the eyes looking upwards to the top of the head. That's a bandha. It's a lock. And that actually increases the fire element in the body. It ignites the force. It blocks the force to the point so that it can expand. You see. So, but we can use that in our life too. We have to add also into our lives a fire element generally. You know, it's no good just going with the flow all the time. You've got to have some passion, you know. You've got to have some inspiration. You've got to put fire behind what you do. You've got to lift yourself, you know. So fire element's very important too, you know. It even comes in people's palms when you do palmistry, you know. We talk about the elements in the hand, whether a person is basically an earth sign, a water sign, a fire sign, and so forth. Because even our whole personality, the idea is that is written in us. It's written in our bodies. We have a tendency towards one of these elements, but hopefully to get all the elements into play in our life. Now the final element is called air, of course. Now this represents lightness, it represents the breath, it represents the wind, the spirit, it's expansion, right? Now obviously breathing itself will stimulate the air element in the human condition, in the aura as well as in the body itself. You see, this is why it comes into play with a lot of psychic work as well. But this can be increased by what in yoga you would call pranayama. It's a form of spiritual breathing, which would involve slowing the breath down in some cases, changing the pace of the breath. Sometimes breath is very fast, like a bellows. Sometimes it's slow, and so forth. You'd have to learn those things. But even in our normal life, the consciousness of our breathing can increase the air element. So sometimes just taking a breath can release a lot of stress and tension. Sometimes simply watching the breath can also lead to relaxation and peace and an awareness of that air element in ourselves, to give us a greater lightness of soul and to take away all the negative energy out of our lives. So what we do is, that's why I love the yoga system of physical exercise. In other videos I've said about yoga is more than just physical, but this is the physical aspect I'm talking about. Ether, the gaze. Earth, the posture. Water, the fluidity of our movement. Fire, the tension of the edge, as it were, sometimes. The use of a bandha, the stretch point as well. Air, the breathing. Bring all those elements together and you have a perfect system of inner transformation, and all the elements working together to make us into our fullest potential and the highest awareness we can have. So If one element is overemphasized, the harmony's lost. So we try to bring all those together. Yoga, physical exercise can do that, but I'm saying it can also apply in ordinary life, and it can apply in any form of exercise you want to do. Awareness of the idea that we are made up of these 5 elements. There you go. End of talk. Is the future set, or can we change it? In my new book, I take a mystical journey to India to do magical remedies that will change my personal destiny. I open a 5,000-year-old secret oracle that tells about what will happen in the future. I meet strange Siddha yogis with miraculous powers who show me how to eradicate the karma that drives events. What I discover changes everything. We can all change our destiny, and maybe together we can change the future of the world as well. Start making that change. My new book, Mystic Journey to India, that has now been made into a major international documentary series, is now available on Amazon.